And to conclude, I would like to focus on Romantic poetry. The Romantic movement in England was characterized by a predominance of poetry. Some of its themes were common to most of the Romantic writers, and some nuances made them extremely unique and original. One of the common themes in Romantic poetry is the importance given to imagination. Through the eye of imagination, the poet was capable of looking deep down inside the object, of having an extremely intense insight into reality, and was thus capable of sharing universal truths with the reader. The poet thus becomes an ordinary man, yes, a man among men, but endowed with particular sensibility and with an extraordinary imagination, which allows him to see deeper inside things and to help the common man to improve his moral conduct. Thus, the poet becomes a sort of a teacher and has a moral purpose in his poems. Together with imagination, memory plays a central role in Romantic poetry. In particular, if we look at William Wordsworth's Preface, once again, the idea that poetry is inspired by emotion recollected in tranquility allows us to understand the crucial role played by memory in the poetic production. But let's look at the actual process of epic creation. I have the process here on my computer and I have jotted it down on the board. Unfortunately, you cannot see it, but you will find it in any textbook. I will read it to you. It is a process that is formed, it is made up of 10 points, and then we will try to understand how these points are related to one another. First of all, there is an object, the poet, the sensory experience, the emotion, the memory, the recollection in tranquility, a kindred emotion, a poem, a reader, and an emotion. 10 steps. So we start from the object and the poet. The poet perceives the object, and here we have the sensory perception that the poet has of the object itself. We will talk about the importance of senses in a minute. Thanks to this perception of the object, the poet feels an emotion. An emotion is the fourth point, and he is able to reproduce this emotion through memory. So the poet has an emotion, then thanks to memory, he is able to recollect this emotion in tranquility and produce a poem. He produces a second emotion, which is called a kindred emotion. It's the result of the memory of the emotion he has felt. He thus produces a poem, he shares it with the reader, and the reader will feel an emotion too. This is the process of the production of an epic poem according to William Wordsworth. So, what are the core points in this production? First of all, there is an object, generally a natural object. So it could be a flower, it could be a daffodil, it could be a rainbow. This rainbow is perceived by the author. So we have senses, the crucial role of senses. Many images related to senses were used by Romantic writers. What are our senses? Well, the senses that are depicted in Romantic poetry are visual, auditory, olfactory, and tactile. And there is a large use of synaesthesias too. A synaesthesia, I'm sure you will know, is an image which is related to one sense but it is associated to an image which is connected to a different sense. For instance, a soft incense. Soft, as you can clearly guess, is related to our tactile sense. Something is soft because we can touch it and it is not hard. Incense, as you know, is related to the olfactory sphere. So soft incense is an example of synaesthesia. This kind of figure of speech was used by all Romantic poets. If you read, when you have a chance to read Keats' poems, Byron, Coleridge, Wordsworth, you will find this in all their poems. What else can we say? Okay, the core, the central role of nature also, but I would like to speak about nature at the end, because nature is perceived in a different way by Romantic poets, and it is interesting to see how differently Wordsworth and Coleridge feel that the role of nature, they feel nature in a different way, they perceive it in a different way. So let's have a look at the language first. In his preface to the Lyrical Ballads, the famous preface published in 1800, William Wordsworth, focuses on the importance of the language. Language, according to Wordsworth, had to be simple, and Wordsworth categorically rejected the poetic diction which was used by his predecessors. So he wanted the language to be simple, he wanted the language to reach the heart, to reach the lives of all men, of ordinary men. Initially, and this is an important point that I would like you to think about, Wordsworth's poems were not particularly appreciated by critics. They did not write positive reviews of his works. But as time went by, Wordsworth actually became one of the most popular and one of the most loved, appreciated writers of his time. He became famous while he was still alive, which is something rather unusual for a poet. Why did this happen? How is this possible? I would like you to think about it and tell me when I see you. Also, another thing, I would like to focus on something else. Wordsworth and Coleridge's work, the Lyrical Ballads. Lyrical Ballads. You have already studied the ballads, but you have studied a different type of ballad. I'm speaking about the medieval ballads. So what do Wordsworth and Coleridge do? They recall an ancient type of production, a popular production. The medieval ballads were also called popular ballads because they were extremely simple. They were produced for everybody to be understood. They used an extremely simple language, and Coleridge and Wordsworth reproduce many of the features and adopt many of the techniques used in the medieval ballads. The repetition, which in the medieval ballads was called incremental repetition, alliteration, the alternation of narration and dialogue. So what are we speaking about? We're speaking about a revival of a popular literary production, a kind of production which I called literary now, but which was not considered literary at all by critics. Only after many years did critics start focusing on the importance of the medieval ballads and considering them an extremely important feature representing the society of the time. So let's think about this too in relation to Wordsworth's popularity. How is it possible that at the beginning of his career he was not considered at all by critics, and at the end of his career he actually was made poet laureat? This is an extremely important award that is given to extraordinary poets for their production. And to conclude, let's have a look at the role of nature in poetry. The link, the bond between nature and the poet and man was extremely important. Man and nature were very, very tightly connected to one another. Nature was a source of inspiration for many romantic writers, but it was different in Wordsworth and in Coleridge, for example. Wordsworth considered nature in a pantheistic way. He considered it strictly connected to the divine, and he also believed that the divine is in everything and everything is divine. On the other hand, Coleridge had a Neoplatonic view of nature, and he considered nature as a form of perfection of ideas. So on one side we have Wordsworth, who considers nature as a source of joy, a source of something soothing, something that brings joy and comfort. On the other side, Coleridge does not share this pantheistic view of nature that William Wordsworth has. And to conclude, looking at the map I have created for you, what can we say? We can have a look at Wordsworth and Coleridge, the friends and the co-workers for the last time. We can recall their most famous work, the Lyrical Ballads. We can state once again that the first edition was published in 1798 and the second edition in 1800, and that the preface to the Lyrical Ballads has been considered the manifesto of Romanticism. We have said this and stated it over and over again, but when we read it, it is important to understand why it is important. We will also focus on the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, which is the first poem in the collection of poems, the Lyrical Ballads, which was written by Coleridge. So that's it for today. I will see you for our interactive lesson online. Bye. Have a nice day.